All right, Juliette, I am excited to talk to you today and having you join us on Menopause Mastery because your subject matter is so very important, I think, for women embarking on this time period of life. And it is a lot of what is underlying maybe a little bit of our distrust, sense of missing something out. We don't know what we really need. Maybe we're missing our legacy. And you kind of tackle all of it as a coach. So I want to chat with you about all that juicy tidbits that you help people go through. But first, I'd love to hear, how did you get here? The story of people's lives are so important to me.
Right? Isn't it funny, right? Because yes, I mean, so I'm a mother. I'm a mother for young adults, all in their 20s. I had four kids in under 3 years' time, which people think like, you crazy. Yes, probably. Um, and I really had a really good life, but there were just things in our marriage that didn't work. So I ended our marriage and then went straight into a relationship with a man with three children. So between the two of us, we had seven children, seven different schools, seven different holidays. It was like running an army. So I didn't particularly take care of myself. I took care of everyone else except for myself. I used to be an interior designer, then taught special educational needs to children because two of my kids are very dyslexic. So at one point, when I was at Forgiving and the relationship got a little bit toxic, with that many children involved, it's always difficult, right? And all the exes, etc. Um, that I spent 9 months in and out of hospital because I kept fainting. So I was, super independent woman, all of a sudden falling out in the street in the market. So yeah, that was a bit of a wake up call. And that is how I got more into the psychology of it, more into the personal development, where I had to kind of hit rock bottom for me to listen to what was happening to me.
Wow. Wow. I think, talking to my guests that I've had over this last year and then definitely my clients over the last, near 2 decades, your story is, maybe not the huge blended family, not for everybody, but I think it's so
It's
true
familiar.
yeah, it's very familiar. And people always say, it was really unique to me. And I'm like, actually, no, I think that's the
Mhm.
critically sad part of it, that we have to hit rock bottom to get there. Now, you went through that transformation yourself, but you really went inward and you really looked at how you spoke to yourself and how you communicate with yourself. That's the core of a lot of what you do. Let's talk deeply about that because most women,
Right.
we wouldn't repeat what we say to ourselves to anybody
Woo!
else.
Would you even be friends with anyone that speaks to you in the way that you speak to yourself, right? And this is the thing. So yes, so I went inside. I also found a group that really helped me, and I started doing a lot of personal development, a lot of group coaching programs, etc. But it was funny. It's all about communication. This weekend, I co-led a retreat in London, and it was wonderful. And actually, it's all about the essence, who we are at our core. And as I was sitting down, I was making myself some breakfast this morning, and I put out this beautiful little placemat and a nice plate, and my eggs and the cups and the egg cups and the toast with grains with lots of avocados. I was thinking, and I took a picture of it. It's like, oh, it's actually that is communicating to myself that I actually honor and I love this body and I love myself, that I'm taking enough time to make myself a meal, to make it look pretty, to have it presented in a way that I actually want to sit down and have a few minutes to eat. And a lot of people would be like, I don't have time for that. It's like, what are you communicating to yourself? What are you communicating to the universe, to God, to the higher power, that you actually don't take the time for yourself? You don't find yourself important. So I know that's a little bit off the topic of communication, but yet it is so much. Everything is a communication. It might be overtly communicated through language, or it's the things that we do. It's the things how we be, how we are as a human, right? It's how do we dress ourselves? What do we wear? How do we look at the world? What do we accept? How do we accept people treating us? What are the requests that we make of people? Hey, I don't want you to speak to me like that. That's a request. But when it becomes a boundary, it's like, if you speak to me like that, I will leave the room. And there's a huge difference energetically in how we can actually be in this communication, be in this full essence of who we are, and that we're not afraid to shine, that we're not afraid to be who we are.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. I look at the last 2.5 years of viral containment, we'll call it that, just for the for
Love
the
it.
for the bots that wouldn't allow us to say those things. But one of the things, and I'm a typical type A. Anybody that listens to my podcast, I have to work really hard
Mhm.
at not being a human doing, right? Like my nature is to do that. And I remember in the middle of being locked down and everything, I was getting ready one morning, and I was still seeing people because we were working all virtually. So my
Yeah.
clinic became 100% virtual. And that morning I had a little bit of time, and I was like, oh, I'm going to put on lotion today. Yeah, I'm gonna put on lotion. And so I was like, 3 weeks into the quarantine, I'm like, I'm putting on lotion every day. I'm like, wow, I need to thank the virus for just doing something so simple as lubricating the skin on my body as a menopausal woman. And I was like, how pitifully sad is that my perception prior to that was something I did maybe sometimes, but I didn't have enough time for it. How long does it take to put on lotion? Seriously.
Completely. And we might put on moisturizer, and I'm one of these people too. I'll put on moisturizer, and they're like, I know it's a bit rough, but yeah, not today.
No one sees it, so who cares? Like, yeah, no one sees it, right? So I think that's
But
I
I
think,
see it and I feel it.
right. It's big. Well, and then that brings up that point of oftentimes, particularly as women, because we're judged physically, and I know we can jump into that conversation and body image and all this other stuff, but we worry about this outward picture. What does everybody see?
Yeah.
And we'll let the skin be scaly underneath. We'll let the destruction happen inside as long as this outer vehicle looks the way society says it's supposed to look, right? And
Yeah.
it comes down
Beautiful
to making,
facade.
yeah, a beautiful meal, right? Just making a beautiful meal and sitting and being with it and having that meal is amazing.
Yeah. But it's so funny, right? So in our retreat, there were a few ladies that had that beautiful facade where everything looked perfect there. And honestly, my life looked like this, right? 4 kids, beautiful husbands, beautiful life, wonderful houses, yeah, everything just looked perfect. And yet, underneath, emotionally, I just wasn't happy. And it's not that I wasn't happy only in our relationship, but I wasn't happy with me. And now looking back on so much, it's like, oh my God, it was like the wake up call that it was just like, you don't have to change your outside because that's what everyone tries to do first. Right? It's like, let's cut the hair, let's lose some weight. Only if I would, I would feel so insane if I had bigger breasts, bigger boob, bigger butt, smaller, thinner, whatever it is, right? Have a boyfriend, have a husband, have children, have not children. But it's like, what about if I change how emotionally I feel about things? And if I start looking back at the things that are actually blocking me, which often are emotionally things that we just swept under the carpet. Yeah, an intense experience that happened too fast for our minds, for our bodies, for our psyche to process, and that we've just shoved away, and we have this beautiful contained facade. Except if people start scratching it a little bit, we break out in tears and it starts crumbling down.
Yeah, yeah. It's part of my hormone reset program. Is a huge part of it. Like we have to look inwardly at ourselves, and because so many women, because I think I love this time period of life because many I happen to be child free, but many people that their children are now grown or pretty close to grown, and so this is a time period, the second season of life, where we start going, what does it all mean? What do I want in my life? But I have so many women that then go, I'll start doing that, or I'll start feeling that way, or I'll step out on that stage, or whatever it is. Once my body looks the way I expect it to look, which is an unachievable state because it's always some astronomically crazy expectation. And I'm like, if you just stepped out on the stage and did it, guess what? The body would probably follow.
Completely.
you know. So do you find? I mean, I'm sure you find that all the time that there's this huge block, and working through that is somewhat painful,
It
and
completely is.
scary.
And I love that you have menopause, and this period of time is really, it is. It's like our second almost like blooming again, right? So one of the first group programs that I made was the Love Your Midlife Method, which goes into all of this. And really it is, we have blocks. We just don't know that we have blocks. And then all of a sudden, because we've kept so busy during life, we get so busy doing, like the question is like, what do you do? It's like, well, who am I? Is that what you're asking me? Or are you asking me what I do? What if I don't do anything, but I be everyone? People get taken aback when I say something like that. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I am. I am a mother, I'm a this and that. But what I do is actually I have people feel again. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, feel your emotions, feel all the sensations in your body again. And people get a bit scared and like, no, our relationship is just fine and dandy. Thank you very much. And then you talk to both people separately and they're like, not sure. I think he might be cheating on me. We might want a divorce. And it's like, what about we bring it back to what you loved about each other? What about bringing it back to some communication? This is why communication is really key. Learning about your feelings, first of all, and then what emotions you have, what's going on in your body, and then being able to communicate it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, if you look at divorce rates, I mean, they spread throughout the decades for sure, but we hit a huge like uptick and up ramp in our late 40s and early 50s because I think everybody spends those 2 decades prior, like, okay, we just got to get the kids functional, right? And then they get done with that. And if they made it through that process, they don't really know each other anymore because all they did was manage schedules and kids and expectations. And all of a sudden, they're two people that share a home, and they don't even know their own selves well enough to be able to communicate what they want to someone else.
So true. Most people don't know themselves at all. They don't know what they don't. They know what they don't like, but they don't know what they like or what they want, what they would like more of. It's so easy to stay into the negative and to say in that energy of lack, of things missing, instead of like the abundance of life of what we have. What are the things that you love about yourself? What are the things you love about your partner? And once you start drawing that in, you just start getting more of that.
Right, right. It was interesting. I was reading an article that you had written, and it was talking about, a lot of couples will get to this time period of life, or maybe they were prior to this, and they're in a sexless marriage, or it's like once a month, this sort of we sort of happen to fall together and it sort of hits or whatever, and they often end up in counseling or coaching because they're not having sex, right? And they think the problem is that they're not having sex. I want you to talk about that because that's huge.
Yeah. So that's it. I mean, I've had quite a few clients, and I have one couple at the moment that have been together for years, and you can see the love between them, but it's kind of become like maybe like roommates, right? Like roommates, people living together, they've got kids together, but the spark has gone. The va-va-voom is completely gone. So let's be honest, right? It's like some of them haven't even had sex in 23 years time. So the thing is, most of them are focused on what they're doing, on what we have to do, and they've stopped connecting. They've stopped actually seeing what it was about the other person that turned you on, that you loved. What were the things that you loved doing for them? Because everything's just become a chore, right? It's that newness that gives off endorphins in our brain, and we're like, ooh, all those feel good chemicals. So I give them homework to actually take sex off the table. They're not allowed to have sex. But then I teach them to have a date morning or a date night. But actually, I try to tell them, like, don't do the things that you normally do. So, you'd go out to dinner. So what about switching it up and making it a date morning? 8 o'clock to whatever, to 10 o'clock in the morning. Put your phones away. Make sure that there are no phones, no distractions. If you still have kids, you've got babysitters. You're not going to talk about the children, not going to talk about work, not going to talk about the house or whatever needs to be done. But really start focusing on each other. Do a pattern interrupt. Yeah, like maybe go kite flying, or things that you would never think that you would actually like, but experience something new together. And experience those 2 hours together and ask each other interested questions, open questions like, hey, what do you love about this? It's we start building communication. So what I love to do is I like to have them play communication game. It's called a dyad. So it's the same prompts that you ask each other for 20 minutes. But what happens is you alternate and then you go deeper and deeper. So the first few questions, well, you'll get answers that are just like a bit swimming on the surface. And one would be like, tell me what you love about me. And so I would say, well, what I love about you is your openness, the way that you include women in all your programs, and the way you really have them feel better about themselves. You understood it, you say thank you, and then you ask me the same prompt again. So, or I would ask you the same prompt. You know, we alternate. And in the beginning, it's a little bit surface swimming, but in the end, you go so deep. And then after that, it's like, oh my God, I really love this person in front of me. And I see, and they are showing me things about myself that I'd completely forgotten. And it's such an eye opener. And then from there on, it becomes much easier to start asking for what kind of touch you may want at one point. What kind of, what kind of romantic gestures you want, because people don't know how to ask for these things. They don't know how to communicate these things.
Oh gosh, no. Well, and I think a lot of us, I mean, my husband and I have been together probably totally together about 25 years, married for almost 22 of those. And you kind of fall back on, well, I know you because we've been together for so long. But what you find restorative or intimate may have changed over time.
And it does.
And it does.
And your way into pleasure might not be the same way as he has. And just because you've done things in a certain way doesn't mean that you can't try new things. I mean, I love taking couples through like a whole different experience and like, try blindfolds, try just looking in each other's eyes, try, putting on music and not having any sound or not having any communication, but just, all kinds of tantra exercises, right? You can make it as big or as small as you want to, but really it's like, how do we communicate with or without words? So that's one of my courses is called Scrumptious Communication, because it is actually, it's a masterclass, but it's learning how to have open-ended questions, how to be curious. Stay curious in your relationship with yourself, in your relationship with your children, with your husband, with your friends, because that is the beauty of life, right?
Yes, yes. It's interesting because I think all these things contribute to obviously lack of communication and, lack of sexual context, sexual connection. But then I think it leads to this sort of insecurity that often shows up. It's like we haven't done this in so long or in the right way. And then it's like, oh my gosh, it's all of a sudden you're back to your first sexual experience kind of fear, which because I hear from people. That's not my specialty, of course, because I'm looking more at the biochemistry and everything. But I hear that a lot. It's like, I'm just so insecure about the experience now. What would you say to your clients that do that? Because I hear it a lot.
Completely. And that's one of the beautiful prompts. Like, tell me what sex means to you. Because we don't know. What does it mean to you? What does intimacy mean to you? Tell me, why would you like to be touched? If you just do 5 minutes prompts like that, you learn a hell of a lot about your partner and you learn about yourself as well. Because, we have these body issues, right? We see these incredible looking people on Instagram and on social media, filters, no filters, whatever. And it has us feel like, oh, there's a bit too much here. The skin is woggly. It's not so elastic anymore. And we just put doubt and doubt and doubt on ourselves. But what about if you can actually start feeling just one part, maybe just your finger, and notice what happens when you put your fingers together really slowly. Slowly rub it up and down. Can you feel every ridge of your finger? Do you like it when there's more pressure? When there's less pressure? Maybe a little bit faster. Maybe you take your finger to the ridge of your nail.
Mm-hmm.
And if you slow it down, and can communicate a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, harder, softer, less pressure, more pressure, you start actually opening that up. It's like, oh, I actually have sensations, but we often don't have the language for it. We don't have the vocabulary for it. So if it is it static? Is it moving? Is it buttery? Is it velvety? Is it warm? Is it cool? What's the sensation? Is it expansive? Is it tight? And you just start thinking like, oh my God, there's so many ways that I can actually express what I'm feeling, which my partner will then also understand. Because if you say, oh, I feel sad, or that doesn't feel good, then that closes it down. Instead of it saying, oh, that feels a bit contracted and cold, they can then in their body also understand. It's like, oh, and if you move your hand a little bit softer and then slower, that feels much more warm in my body and open and expansive. So you can then start to communicate it this way. And once there's that curiosity, then then that's where the fun starts.
Right, right. Well, so many, I would say, particularly women, we've been engendered and through societal kind of conditioning, we're good. Either you're prim and proper, right? And that's what I was told. Like sex was something you just didn't do until marriage, and it was supposed to procreate. And then if you're not, you're a slut, right? And so we don't even have this language to communicate what feels good to us. We may not even know what feels good to us, but to communicate it in a way that feels safe and comforting, that's a huge hurdle for some people to leap, and most of us.
It's a huge thing because that's it, right? Who has taught us about sex? What have we learned about it? What have our parents taught us? What has school taught us? What has society taught us? Religion? And all of a sudden you start looking at all this programming and it's like, that's not even me. And so all these outside influences have just influenced us, and we've taken that on as gospel, as like, oh, that is how I should behave. And then the guilt of like, oh my God, I actually like sex, but I'm quite religious, or I've had marriage before sex and I'm terrible, or I like stuff which is out of the ordinary. You just feel so much shame. You feel like you're all alone. So I would say there's also porn doesn't help, right? Porn kind of has it be that women just have get juiced up and want intercourse immediately. It's like it takes 40 minutes to 45 minutes to actually stimulate and to get a woman's body lubricated and get up to speed so they can be penetrated. So often we get penetrated by hands or by any body parts way before we're ready, which means the body really tightens up and it creates that grasping and they're like, ugh, So honestly, start looking for communities out there. There's so much online. I'm an erotic blueprint coach as well. I have a program on that where it's discover your way into pleasure. Start looking at what's actually turns you on. What are the things that you like? Do you like, do you smell something and you're like, oh my God, my whole body just relaxes when I put candles and I can smell like a fig and eat it. And that's what we call the sensual. And there's also an energetic being, which, when you come into a room, you feel the energy, which also means that you can feel the vibrations of people. So oftentimes they need much slower, much lighter touch than anyone else. Then you have the sexual that we talk about normally, and that likes talking about sexual parts, and the aim is often climax or intercourse. And then there's kinky. Kinky is anything which is outside the norm. So it could be just getting undressed in front of each other, or it could be psychological or impact play. And then there's another part which is called the shapeshifter, so that has a little bit of everything. And so unless you start knowing about these things, and once I started learning about this, I'm like, oh my God, I have shapeshifted to my partners always. And always because, that was one of my things that I knew pleasure, but it was like, that was the only way that, and I kind of felt like I was starving because there were so many other parts of me that weren't met. And once you know this, and once there are other people out there, there's so much acceptance. It's really the empathy. It's the me too. It's like, oh my God, I'm not a weirdo. Me too. There are other people out there, or there are other people out there that aren't having sex or that are having like not very good sex. But these days, no one should have pain when they're having intercourse. No one should allow to have sex against their will, but really have it the way that you want it.
Yeah, which really takes that communication piece, especially if you're in a loving and caring relationship. You know, if you were to isolate men and ask them what they want is to make their partner feel amazing, right? Like that is their biggest sexual turn on, but they can't do that. You know, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, if they don't know what you want, and then regardless of somebody's, you know, sexual preferences and things like that, the partner is always there's generally in a loving relationship wants to contribute to the pleasure of their partner.
Completely. And that's the thing, right? That's the thing that we often don't understand. It's like, yeah, but then he'll just think that I'm high maintenance. It's like, be high maintenance, be a high maintenance woman, because then you actually know exactly what you want and you're setting yourself and your partner up for success. So there's also a way that you can communicate. I mean, I hear most partners in a long-term relationship saying, "Oh, I wish you would just be like Nikki." It's like, whoa. It's like, how would you like to hear a communication like that? It's like, okay. It's like, instead of saying, I love what Nikki does for his wife, and it has me feel a little bit lonely that we don't have the same kind of relationship. It's it's the same communication, but in a completely different way. The other way, it actually shows, hey, I'm feeling a little bit sad, and I want, I feel a little bit envious because I actually want that kind of communication or that kind of relationship, and I know we have it in us.
Yeah, yeah, the language matters.
Oh my God. You always or you never. I mean, those two things I just have people strike out of their vocabulary.
Right. It's like, oh goodness, don't do that at all. So what's interesting because I keep going back and you know listening to this communication and partnership, and that's often where people sort of scramble, and that's where they spend a lot of energy. But ultimately, what you're saying, it's the internal work. Like you have to work on yourself first before really you can come together as a couple. And it makes me think, so one of the things that I did as I kind of transitioned into menopause was I had the same thing. You know, I remember reading your story about being very busty very early, you know, and I was the same girl, just out to hear, you know, the boys saying, can you touch your elbows behind your back? All that. I mean, just, you know the drill. And
Like
just,
my face is here.
yeah, my face is here.
Not down there.
I would wear these gigantic sweatshirts in like junior high, and because I just didn't want anybody to see me, and so grew up with the same sort of body shame. So as I go into my 40s, and you know, I want my relationship to be stronger. I want to not look in my body and start picking it apart in the mirror. So the two things that I did is I would stand in front of the mirror and start looking for the thing that I liked. Right. So I was like, okay, I let it rip about what I didn't like too, but I was like, okay, and now I need to find the thing that I like. And the other thing I did, which is a lot of people are just like, I can't believe you did it. I would take pictures for my husband. You know, you know, yes, I took like 30 pictures, and one I would, you know, be like, I like that one, and that would be the,
Of course.
yeah. And I was like,
Take
just like,
100, and there'll be like two or three that you might want to share.
yeah.
But taking the pictures for yourself, right?
Well, and that's ultimately what it was for. It was more for me because at first I was like, well, I'm going to show him this one that I liked. And then afterwards, it was really for me because then I would look at those pictures periodically and be like, I looked pretty there, you know, or I looked good. And it was this slow shift in accepting my body, but not acceptance isn't the word I'm looking for. It's finding beauty in that body.
Starting to love your body, right? And I love what you're saying that you started looking at the positive things. But often it's like, this is what we hear often with affirmations, just be positive. And I say bullshit to that. You know, you have to have both. We live in a dualistic world, right? So you need to also have access to the negative stuff. So oftentimes what I'll do with my clients is have them look in the mirror, and I do an exercise called tap and bitch because I'm a tapper as well. So we tap all the spots, and then they just bitch about what they see. You know, it's like these stretch marks in the belly, and look at all these flabby this and that. And it's so cathartic to actually be able to say all the stuff that you don't like about yourself to someone else or to yourself in the mirror. And actually what happens is you'll start yawning, you'll start releasing some energy, or yeah, usually yawning, or burping, or something will come out. It's like, oh, it's not that stuck anymore. And then start looking at the things. It's like, oh, this I like. It's like, I like my cheekbones, I like my eyes. And then that sometimes might be all it is. It's like, oh, I like the shape of my hands, or I like the shape, the little indentation of my knee. And slowly and surely, it's really starts building up. Well, what I love doing is writing a love letter to my body, and really like a love letter, and just saying, hey, I've hurt you, and I've squeezed you into jeans that were 5 sizes too small, and put you on the most restrictive diets. I've birthed 4 children, and stretch marks, and really didn't treat you in the way that I want to honor you. And now I really want to honor you, and I love you. And you've produced these 4 children, and you've carried me all these years. And I have them take some time and put really beautiful music on, but it's so, so cathartic.
Oh yeah. I just it's something that I think a lot of people shy away from because as a nutritionist, right? Most people want to focus on these very tangible, like what macro am I eating? What is this? And that is part of the thing. But I'm like, if you can't get this out here to look like what you want, if you're talking trash in here the whole time,
Oh God, I love that. Yeah.
it's just not going to work at all.
Yeah.
And and again, I think your work is so profound because you won't be able to have the relationship with someone else if you trash talk yourself like that. Like how can someone else love you the way that you deserve if you can't at least start to love yourself the way you want to be loved?
So true. One of the participants this weekend said, "Space for grace." So give yourself the space for grace to have all those feelings, to really start acknowledging who you are.
Yeah. So when you're working like in these workshops and things like that, do you find that when I'm going to use women because that's the primary target of our show, but I do have some men that listen to it, smart guys. But do you find that for a lot of women that as they go through this journey, they also tap into maybe a career change or something like that that they want and that also reaching for that new thing, whatever it might be. I want to be an artist, I want to paint, whatever it is, that helps their relationships also.
Completely. And also, I would say, even when they start focusing more on themselves, all of a sudden they have a new career, or they will start taking up a new hobby, and everything around them changes. So it's the more attention you put on yourself and your inner emotions, the more your surroundings of you, everyone around you starts noticing it, and that starts changing. And I've had women work on themselves without the husband, and coming back after a few sessions saying, oh my God, my husband has completely changed. It's like, well, actually, you've completely changed, and that has seen, he's seen that, and he wants to also then acknowledge that, and he's loving it.
Yeah,
So
or
it's
maybe
beautiful. Everything just changes, right? You bring in new friends, new opportunities, pay rises. It's just being crazy. Everything drops into place all of a sudden.
yeah, because I think if we look statistically, the women actually contribute more
Mm-hmm.
to society. So if you were to look at accomplishments, doing whatever it is they're doing in this season of life, it is not the 25 to 30-year-old, at least historically, that makes major contributions. It's actually when we hit this time period of life because there's a wisdom that happens here. And there is, again, I think, an inward focus that hopefully shows up and allows women to do that. But I find so many times people start to think of this midlife, which I struggle with that word, but that we're on the other side of the mountain, so therefore I shouldn't do something. Like people were like, when I went back to get my PhD, why would you do that?
Right.
Why would you do that at 49 years old? I'm like, because I wanted to.
I know. People looked at me, it's like, you're studying again? You're like, yes. Like, but you're working really hard. I'm like, yeah, I'm really loving it, and I'm really helping a lot of other people. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think that whole getting into that inner person is so important. So if we were to kind of wrap this in sort of a wrapper and give my listeners something really juicy, like 2 or 3 things that they should really focus on, what would you tell my listener to, like, if they wanted to start doing this work, right? What would you give them as their homework from today?
I would love people, this is one of the homework pieces I give people. I would love people to put a timer on their phone for twice a day for 1 minute to 90 seconds. So either 60 seconds or 90 seconds. And then just check in with yourself, put the phone away, take a deep breath in through your nose, out through your mouth, and then notice what's the thought that's coming up. And then really allow yourself to have that thought. And notice what's the emotion that's coming up. And to fully feel that emotion, not to just feel it and like, shove it under the carpet, but no, fully feel it. It doesn't take longer than a few seconds, not longer than 60 seconds to move it. And then notice what's coming up in your body. What are the body sensations? Where in your body are you feeling temperature? Is there any friction? What's the quality of it? Is there prickliness? Is there expansion, contraction? Is it soft? Is it hard? Perhaps there's an image. Really allow yourself to feel. That is how you start to feel, how you start to thaw up your body and your mind. And do that twice a day and notice how much difference that makes. Another thing that I teach people is really to be aware of gratitude. What are the 2 things that you loved about today? Even when they're tiny little things. It's like, oh, I love the way that the sun hit my face when I was looking outside. Or the way that I could take a breath and just see the beautiful sky. Or the way that this gentleman stopped the car and had me cross the zebra crossing. Whatever it is, but start becoming aware of the little things that you like. And then make a list of what you loved about your partner. That's one of the major things. It's like, start making a list. It's like, when you were together, what are 3 things that you loved about each other? And what were 3 things that you loved about yourself at that point as well?
Oh, those are great.
I mean, they're small things, but they will make a massive difference.
Yeah, the easy to implement small things, are exponential when you do them consistently.
Completely. Yeah.
Exactly. Gosh, this has been such a good talk. Oh my gosh, we could talk forever. We haven't even talked about, you were talking about your erotic blueprint. We could go off on that one for a while too. We'll have to come back and do that again, because again, you have to explore that side. You can't have the relationship that you want if you don't know kind of your blueprint and where to go with that too. Gosh.
Pleasure blueprint, right?
Yes, exactly. So, Juliette, do you have a way that our listeners can get a hold of you? Anything you'd like to let them know?
Yes, absolutely. So my website is called feelfullyu.com. And I am on Instagram as Juliette Karaman and on Facebook as well. I have an upcoming scrumptious communication masterclass. There'll be the pleasure codes. There'll be small masterclasses for 2-3 days or so that people can drop into, and if they actually love it, then we can always have a bigger mastermind. But it's I've just noticed the power of group work, where it's so powerful to do things together, because one person pops and then someone else has a realization because of that.
Yes, I love group. And, sometimes women are frightened of that because they don't want to share, because they think what they're going through is so it is personal to them, but that they're the only one. And I'm like, oh, I promise you, the whole room has the same issue. But they may not ask the question because you're there to ask the question so everybody can help learn from each other. It's huge.
Completely. That's what we saw this weekend. Small group, but so potent because of what was happening, and that they could all open up. Safety is so important, right?
Yeah, and especially after 2 years of being quarantined and being alone, that isolation's terrible. Well, and we'll make sure to link to all of those in the show notes as well.
Amazing.
Well, Juliette, thank you so much for being on the show. Juliette's actually from the UK, so we made this work with the time change, so thank you so much for doing that.
We did.
Yes, and thank you. And we'll have you back on and talk about erotic blueprint and pleasure blueprint at some point as well.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.